Like it or not, we are fighting a war that may be unwinnable. Invaders with strange-sounding names like leafy spurge, Dalmatian toadflax, tansy ragwort are costing us billions of dollars a year, and the end is nowhere in sight.
Noxious weeds are like alien invaders. If we did nothing, I'd say it'd be catastrophic.
Unfortunately, few of us seem to care or even know of the dangers that lurk around us.
People don't see the change. It's like a slow-moving wildfire. It's a slow-moving explosion.
These outlaw species will change the way we work and play in the outdoors. The War of the Weeds, next on Outdoor Idaho.
Funding for Outdoor Idaho is made possible by your contributions to the Friends of Idaho Public Television and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
You have to admire their tenacity, their will to survive. In a perverse kind of way, they really are pretty amazing plants. Hi, I'm Bruce Reichert and welcome to Outdoor Idaho. Take rush skeleton weed, for example. In the last decade or so, this plant has taken over large parts of Idaho. Notice how it's shaped. Very few leaves, basically all skeleton or stems, so it can grow in drought conditions. In the center is a milky substance that tastes terrible, so animals don't eat it. It has a large root system that makes it nearly impossible to pull and even difficult to poison. And each plant has thousands of seeds that can travel for miles. Rush skeleton weed is one of 36 plants in Idaho that have officially been called noxious or harmful. Now, these invasive species can change the West, much like blister rust did to the white pine forests of northern Idaho. Now, granted, it can be a slow, quiet process, but then one day you wake up and wonder, what the heck happened? We know they are an inconvenience. Every mountain biker eventually comes to hate puncture vine, a pest plant from the Mediterranean whose obnoxious goat head-like seeds puncture bike tires and bare feet with equal abandon.
God, you wouldn't believe how many flats we change in a week.
But having to visit the local gear shop to fix a flat tire is nothing compared to losing one's ranch, or watching wildlife disappear, or seeing vast vistas turn into a burned-out, weedy wasteland. Making accommodations with invasive species is nothing new. In fact, we humans, perhaps the most invasive of species, are constantly forcing others to put up with our whims and desires. But even we have had to stand in awe of the exploitative nature of species like Bromus tictorum, better known as cheatgrass. This annual grass snuck into this country from Asia sometime in the 19th century and has been cheating farmers and ranchers and wildlife ever since. It outcompetes the native grasses and is nutritionally good only 3 to 4 weeks. Animals forced to rely on it in autumn and winter have starved to death. But try as they might, land managers have had little success in beating it back. If you burn it, they will come, even faster. In fact, cheatgrass and fire feed on each other, building each other up, while they destroy the native landscape. This cycle of cheatgrass and wildfire, leading to more cheatgrass and wildfire, is the kind of downward spiral from which there seems no way out. But at least cheatgrass has some value in the spring for some animals. You can't say that about the latest invasion of outlaw species. They are truly bad news, crowding out the natives, leaving us nothing in return. Here in the West, we lose 3,000 acres a day to invasive species, like spotted knapweed, a biennial that produces up to 25,000 seeds per plant. The seeds can remain viable for 8 years. Rush skeleton weed, a perennial that spreads quickly by seed and by root, with a toxin that makes it undesirable to even grasshoppers and crickets. Yellow star thistle, an annual which causes death in horses and grows wherever cheatgrass lives. And leafy spurge, a perennial with roots exceeding 20 feet in depth, which can cause blisters and even blindness. They are attacking us where we work, where we play, on land, and in the water. The cost to Americans is reaching catastrophic proportions. By some estimates, more than $130 billion a year. Certainly, livestock did its share of spreading them. The global nature of commerce has given them a toehold in new areas. And we humans are doing our fair share as well, in sometimes the most innocent of ways. It also doesn't help that our climate seems perfectly suited to these invader species. On a recent visit to Idaho, the chief of the U.S. Forest Service got a first-hand look at the spread of rush skeleton weed near Garden Valley in central Idaho.
And this is prime deer and elk winter ranges. Look at the densities on some of this ground here. This is some of this is 30 to 40 plants per square meter. You can see up there where it's really heavily infested with noxious weeds. That's the rush skeleton weed right up there.
And you can see right where the erosion started on that.
Exactly right.
On that head cut there. The rush skeleton weed back in the early 60s, when it first spotted, was like 1/4 of an acre. There's 3 million acres in Idaho now with rush skeleton weed. And that's what really got me personally alarmed. It was huge. It was absolutely huge. And the effect on biodiversity, the effect on recreation, the effect on wildlife, the effect on water quality, all those things, it became very, very apparent to me. And what we need to do now is we need to stop any further spread and then start eradicating as much as we can those places that have been taken over.
But the problem is too big, even for the Forest Service. And that's why they've teamed up with private owners and groups like the Western Whitewater Association to tackle problems along the Salmon River in the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness.
When we first started this project, we had to almost hog tie the first 10 people and throw them on the boat and blindfold them to get them to come and kill weeds. This year we have approximately 40 on this project, and I probably turned away 40.
That's because there's a growing awareness that invasive weeds are a serious problem in the wilderness.
What it's done is taken away wildlife habitat. It wasn't usable for recreating. The deer and elk were gone out of their winter ranging areas. Here at the James Ranch, there was an airstrip here, and it was totally non-usable because of the knapweed infestation. It was 3 feet tall and you could not land an airplane here.
Gentlemen, pump your sprayer.
Men and women using hand-to-hand combat and herbicides, fighting the deceptively pretty but devastating spotted knapweed. They haven't won the war, but they do seem to be winning the initial skirmishes.
In the early and mid 90s, a lot of these river bars were just totally dominated by spotted knapweed. In 1999, we began our treatment program, and just about all of our large infestations have been treated very successfully. We're going back into them in a maintenance mode, but it's nothing like it was. Weeds have just really began to get a foothold here. We're putting together a valiant effort with our partners, but we're concerned about the weed infestations that are up in the rugged areas that it's hard to detect.
Herbicides are just one approach in the fight against invasive plants. Meet Agent Eustenophus, street name Yellow Star Hairy Weevil. He may not be much to look at, but this little guy is making a sizable dent in the flowering seed heads of yellow star thistle, a noxious weed that once blanketed entire hillsides in Hell's Canyon.
You know, we will never eradicate yellow star. That's not how biocontrol works. The adults actually feed on the plant and then also lay their eggs in the bud, and the larvae will actually eat the seeds out of a developing bud. And we're starting to see quite a dramatic effect as a result of these.
Shriveled seed heads and plants with no blooms are encouraging signs. Lynn Danley with the Bureau of Land Management says the yellow star hairy weevil is just one of 5 different insects in use around Hell's Canyon. The insects come from yellow star thistle's homeland near the Mediterranean. Once in the United States, they are brought to outdoor nursery sites like this one near Whitebird. Unleashing foreign insects on Idaho's wildlands may seem ecologically questionable. But Idaho's top weed manager says the insects are tested extensively before they're ever let loose.
That particular species of insect will only eat that particular species of plant. Biological agents do take a lot longer to establish themselves, but once they do, they thrive in the area and they start to slowly control the invasive plant species in that area.
It can take years more before a biocontrol agent shows any noticeable effect on its weed. But patience is slowly paying off, and the insects may prove themselves to be the best long-term hope in the war on weeds. In the short term, the current residents of Hell's Canyon struggle with landscapes held hostage by a destructive weed. Wildlife have probably suffered the most.
It poses a threat to the wintering range for deer and elk especially. It outcompetes the native plant communities. It can actually be toxic to the animals.
Yellow star thistle causes a chewing disease in elk, deer, and even horses that kills. For ranchers who've worked this land for generations, yellow star thistle is crowding out native grasses, ruining grazing land, and threatening a way of life. Rancher Ray Hole saw yellow star thistle nearly devour his business.
We had literally thousands of acres of yellow star in this place when we got here.
I need to get a count on these somehow, but I'll see what I can get done.
But a stubborn little animal represents new hope that thousands of acres of rangeland may not be lost after all.
Goats are kind of unique in that they prefer a lot of these weeds that we have. Come to find out that a lot of the weeds are pretty good food actually for a goat, fairly high protein, good palatability. They just don't fit other animals' sense of taste.
The goats eat yellow star with abandon. For them, it's a treat. For Ray, it's an affordable treatment plan.
We've been really pleased. They liked yellow star later in the season rather than earlier, so we can be grazing the cows on it earlier, and then after the cows are off and the grass has grown up, kind of like it is here, let the grass get the seed, then we can come back in with the goats and eat the seed heads off the yellow star and reduce the weed population, the yellow star population, by doing that each year.
Neighbors are noticing. Ray's goats have become so popular, the herd is for hire. Their next big job is for the U.S. Forest Service on some noxious weeds near Orofino. But it's taken time for the idea to catch on.
When we first started talking about doing goats for this kind of work, we had a lot of people looking at us funny.
No one's laughing now, and Ray's ranch is back in business. Another one of Idaho's vertical environments is under invasion. Towers of eroded granite lend a mythical beauty to the landscapes in and around the City of Rocks. And while these formations are beautiful to behold, the steep, rugged terrain forces weed managers to invent creative solutions to a growing problem.
That is the root system of the leafy spurge.
Gordon Edwards knows firsthand the damaging effects of leafy spurge.
That's all one.
As the Cassia County weed supervisor, he's seen the plant take over rangeland, choke out native plants, and ruin habitat for the area's deer and elk populations.
As you look at that, that is a very woody plant. It's got a milk sap in it. If you get that milky sap that's in there on your finger and you rub your eyes, it'll make you blind.
The noxious weed first showed up on the steep hills and deep draws of this area 30 years ago. Stumped by the plant's affinity for hard-to-reach habitat, Gordon decided he needed an alternative to the typical approach of using trucks or off-road vehicles to spray herbicides.
A pack animal like this can actually spray more ground in a day than we can on four-wheelers.
The mules carry the weight of an anti-weed invention called the mule-back sprayer. It's a design developed by Gordon himself.
They can get to these hard-to-reach areas, the small infestations that haven't got a foothold, and with very little chemical put into our environment, we're able to take that out and to put it back into its natural state, so they've been a very useful tool.
After chasing weeds all spring, Gordon and his mules will go back to the same areas in the fall. But this time, they'll haul in the seeds of native grasses to plant in place of the leafy spurge. It's a war that won't ever be completely won, but Gordon and his patented low-tech approach are, for now, holding the enemy at bay. There's another exotic newcomer that's causing real concern among the nation's anglers. This is Silver Creek, the crystal clear, spring-fed stream that wound its way into history. Since the days of Ernest Hemingway, anglers have traveled across the globe to lose themselves in the rhythmic pursuit of Silver Creek's plump rainbow, brown, and brook trout.
Mr. Trout doesn't like the sharp taste of steel.
But an unwelcome new visitor is causing a stir in these waters. This is the New Zealand mud snail. It's smaller than a pencil eraser. Problem is, it takes only one to create thousands upon thousands more. And it seems the snails have taken a liking to this place.
We know of no way to get rid of it at the moment. That doesn't mean people aren't trying to find ways. It's just that so far we can't say what it will be.
Karen Pratt says the New Zealand mud snail first showed up in Idaho's Snake River in the 1980s. It probably hitched a ride on the boots of a traveling fisherman. It was first documented in Silver Creek in 2001. And already, the snail has spread to several popular fishing spots.
It's pretty hard to control something this tiny and this productive that moves with people.
Research has confirmed the New Zealand mud snails are on the increase. So far, their numbers don't represent a serious threat, but the snails have the potential to throw this entire ecosystem out of balance.
The New Zealand mud snail is a problem for the ecosystem here because it can grow to extremely high densities. In Montana and other parts of Idaho, they've been documented at over 500,000 per square meter, which is an extremely high density.
The snails feed on the same aquatic plants that support Silver Creek's abundant insect populations. If the snails' numbers increase dramatically, and they're known to do that, they could outcompete the insects. And that would spell trouble for Silver Creek's famous trout, who rely on insects for food. With no practical solutions for killing off the snails, local outfitters and Silver Creek managers have teamed up to slow its spread. The Nature Conservancy set up a series of wash stations where anglers are asked to wash their gear before and after they fish.
5 minutes before and 5 minutes after, I think it's certainly worth it if this proves to get rid of or not transport these snails around. I think it's well worth it.
Slowing the spread of the New Zealand mud snail is a move in the right direction, but it's far from a final solution. But solutions don't come easy in the fight against invasive species.
I don't think anyone believes we'll totally lose the fishery. I guess it would depend on how well they adapt to our habitat. So it's not like we have no hope. It's just that we don't know where it's going to go and we need to pay attention.
Another underwater invader is attacking some of Idaho's most pristine waters. It's quietly clogging up the shorelines of favorite places like Lake Ponderay, Hayden, and Spirit Lakes. In the Ponderosa pine country of scenic Payette Lake, the aquatic plant is damaging one of Idaho's most loved playgrounds. It's called Eurasian water milfoil, and it presents an obstacle for boaters, swimmers, and local area weed managers.
It can hinder power generation. It can survive in waters where the pH is really high. It can survive under ice. It can survive out of water for 2 weeks. It's a very resilient weed. It can grow up to 18 inches a day.
Eurasian water milfoil can become so dense it destroys water quality, hinders boat recreation, and has even drowned swimmers caught up in its dense biomass.
Young kids have been known to take snowshoes and walk on the top of the surface of the matted weed. It's so thick. I wouldn't recommend doing that.
An intensive dredging effort is knocking back the weed. But like many of Idaho's invasive species programs, it's expensive. It's the kind of work Idaho can't afford to ignore.
If we did nothing for the next 10 years, no weed control efforts, nothing, I'd say it'd be catastrophic.
Invasive species ignore all boundaries. Fence lines mean nothing to them. And that is forcing us to rethink how we view the West. In 2004, the Governor's Summit on Invasive Species was an attempt to reach out to all groups, to create new coalitions to combat the common enemies of Scotch thistle, purple loosestrife, and field bindweed. It's a challenge that forces us to think outside the box, and even to think outside the atmosphere. Here at Idaho State University in Pocatello, satellite images and funding from NASA are helping scientists track weeds.
And all these little red dots are predictions of where leafy spurge occurs.
Computers read the spectral signature of a plant. The software scans through aerial images, searching for the right combination of high-spectrum light waves, and sounding the alarm on remote patches of noxious weeds before they conquer another new landscape.
And the size of the infestation that we're able to detect in some cases is about the size of a large dining room table. Those sort of infestations are fairly easy for the weed manager to win that sort of battle.
Pretty impressive, but there are also some down-to-earth things we can do in this war of the weeds. Check your clothing and equipment for weed seeds after every outing. Clean watercraft and off-road vehicles before and after outings. Avoid traveling through weed-infested areas. And put that GPS unit to good use. If you find a patch of weeds, get a global position mark of the weeds and report it to your local county weed supervisor. Something that simple could keep your favorite hunting or hiking area safe for a few more years. Botanist Roger Rosentreter has hiked these foothills for 20 years. And just in that amount of time, he's noticed a change in their color and their composition.
The colors have gone from a gray-green or dark green to a straw color. Nowadays, when it burns and becomes all grass, it becomes a little more arid. Some people refer to this as desertification. So it becomes a drier environment because of the structure of the vegetation and the interaction with the weather conditions. You look at the history of civilized world, you go to the Middle East actually, where we have a very similar climate. If you want to see what arid Idaho is going to look like, it's going to look a lot like the deserts there.
The challenge of combating invasive species seems overwhelming, but there are stories of success.